We know that water is very essential in our life, but I don't know if everyone has noticed that water is mentioned several or many times in different types of literature of the Jewish, as we say, the Jewish Aron HaSfarim HaYehudi, the Jewish literature. And interestingly enough, it has very many symbolism behind it. I would like to start discussing the symbolism of water in relation to Eretz Yisrael and to Tu B'Shvat with the psukim that Kadosh Baruch Hu describes to us what land are we going to get when we are in the desert. And this is from Sefer Dvarim. כי השם אלוקיך מביאך אל ארץ טובה, ארץ נחלי מים, עיינות ותהומות יוצאים בבקעה ובהר, ארץ חיטה ושעורה, וגפן ותאנה ורימון, ארץ את שמן ודבש. And interestingly enough, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu describes Eretz Yisrael to us before we get into it, he doesn't promise us any Niagara Falls or Lake Ontario or anything like that in the sense of water. He promises us Ayanot, Utehomot, Nechalim. And what are these terms? What do they describe? So when we say Tehomot, we basically mean the water that comes from the underground, the water that is basically coming down from the rain and dissolves into the ground and stops wherever the ground does not let it dissolve inside anymore and stands down there, and we call that Mei Tehom. And what is Ayanot, Ma'ayanot? Ayanot and Ma'ayanot are basically that hole in the ground that the water that is sitting down there finds its way and goes out, what we call in English springs. Nechalim are basically the water that flows out from the underground through those springs, through those Ma'ayanot, and become streams that we see. And I assume most of you that have been in Israel have seen pictures of Israel. You've seen that many of the water that we see in Israel is the water like we call today Nechalim, Ma'ayanot, and that's what God basically is expressing and telling us when He gives us the land. Another description of Eretz Yisrael, again from Sefer Dvarim, is the following: כי הארץ אשר אתה בא שמה לרשתה לא כארץ מצרים היא. The land is not going to be like the land of Egypt. What is the land of Egypt? כארץ מצרים היא אשר יצאתם משם, אשר תזרע את זרעך והשקית ברגלך כדגן הירק. That's a description of the land of Egypt that I'm going to discuss in a second. No, that's not going to be that land. What is Eretz Yisrael? הארץ אשר אתם עוברים שמה לרשתה, ארץ הרים ובקעות. It's going to be a land of mountains and of valleys. למטר השמיים תשתה מים. The water is going to come from the sky. It's going to be water from rain. ארץ אשר השם אלוקיך דורש אותה תמיד, עיני השם אלוקיך בה מראשית השנה ועד אחרית השנה. So again, the water is going to come from the sky. It's going to be connected to your connection with the land of Eretz Yisrael. Not like Egypt. We should understand what was Egypt. How did people drink water? How did people use the water in Egypt? Egypt, as we know, is dependent on the Nile River. And when the Psukim tell us that the Nile River, or Eretz Mitzrayim, is a land where you heshketa beraglecha kegan hayarak, you will water by your foot. What does that mean? How do you water your land in Eretz Mitzrayim with your foot? It means, and that is true until today as you see in the pictures, the Egyptians take water from the Nile, they create tunnels from the Nile, long tunnels that bring the water to their gardens, and as you see in the picture in the left, all the greenery, all the vegetation, anything that grows in Egypt is all along the Nile River. Egypt is almost all of it a desert, except for what is around the Nile River, as you see on the left picture. But that is Eretz Mitzrayim, and the Nile has been and will be there forever. And they always have that source of water. They don't basically need, in any sense, the water from the sky, the rain, because they always have that permanent source of water. So Eretz Yisrael is that, and interestingly also, if you would look in Sefer Bereshit in the description of Sodom, before Sodom was, how would we say, destroyed, Sodom is also described as Gan HaYarak, very similar to Mitzrayim, meaning it also had that permanent source of water. We can't see it today in our eyes because whoever's been to Sodom knows there's nothing to see there but a desert. But it used to be Gan HaYarak, like Gan Eden almost. That's the description of Sodom when Lot decides to choose it. And now we also understand why he wanted to choose Sodom, because it was green. So, what is Eretz Yisrael? So as we said before, Eretz Yisrael does not have that permanent source of water. Even today, if we think about it, if we look into it, we know that it is part of our source of water, but not the major part. And even the Kinneret, which seems to be a permanent source of water in Eretz Yisrael, we all know that it's not a permanent source whenever there's not enough water coming down from the sky, and even that source is not something that we can rely on just like that. And that is basically what the Parshanim say about this description of Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael, on one hand, is something that is a problem because you cannot rely on a permanent source. But that is exactly, on the other hand, its greatness. Eretz Yisrael gets water when the people in Eretz Yisrael are connected to their God. Limtar hashamayim tishteh mayim, and as we say when we say Shema Yisrael also, v'ayayim shamua, whenever we are good, whenever we do mitzvot, whenever we dorshim et Hashem, God brings us the water. There's a very, very, very direct connection between our behavior and what comes down from God for us. And the water is dependent on that relationship. And when we're good, we're supposed to get the water. When we're not good, we're not going to get the water. Not like Eretz Mitzrayim. And if people know this Parshanut, they might recall also another Parshan saying the same idea about the punishment that the snake gets in Sefer Bereshit. Why does the snake, after Chet Adam HaRishon, gets a punishment to get Al Gufncha telech ve'afar tochal kol yemei chayecha? Why is that a punishment? To have food on the ground, to eat the dust of the ground. That means he has food everywhere. Why is that a punishment? The same idea that the connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu is something that you should appreciate. The fact that you have what to eat all the time, and Kadosh Baruch Hu is basically banishing you and saying, I don't want to see you anymore. You eat, but you have no connection with me. That is the punishment. And that's the same idea with the water coming down from the rain on Eretz Yisrael. I want to continue to discuss a few more terms in the connection of water and Eretz Yisrael. When we say that water comes from the rain, what do we do with that water? How do we use it? How do we collect that water? So we have basically two terms that the sources use. We have the term bowl, which is basically a hole that people dig in the ground, and they put around it something that will make the water not leak out. Tiach, which is in English. Okay, you all know what I mean. And the second term is be'er. What is the difference between bo and be'er? And we'll go to the symbolism of those two terms. A bo, as we said, is something that you dig, and the water comes from the rain through little canals that people make and collect the water from the canals to this hole in the ground, and the water is kept there in order for you to use, usually in the months of the summer when the rain does not come down anymore. But a be'er is something else. A be'er, a well in English, is basically a hole that you dig until you get to the underground water. Meaning the water in the well does not come from above. The water in the well comes from the streaming water in the underground, the tehomot, the main tehom that we said before. And that is basically what we try to do. We try to dig down until we get to that surface of water, and then when we get to that surface, the water comes out through the well, and we use that water. So the word bo and be'er have lots of symbolism in midrashim. For example, we have a very known Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. 5 תלמידים היו לרבן יוחנן בזכאי, הוא היה מונה שבחן. רבי אליעזר בן הורקינוס, בור סוד שאינו מאבד טיפה. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Horkinus, is a cemented cistern that does not lose a drop. What is that? We'll explain in a second. I'm skipping to the 5th. Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach, כמעיין המתגבר. He is symbolized as a ma'ayan. A ma'ayan in our explanation, again, is something that is water that comes flowing from the underground water, from the down of the earth. What is behind those two Rabbi Yochanan tried to say about his students? So we'll start with Rabbi Eliezer ben Elazar, am I wrong? Ben Horkinus. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is trying to describe this student, he's trying to say something good about him. He's basically trying to symbolize the way his student learns Torah. The different sources of water are symbols to the way people learn, study Torah. So, bo sud she'eino me'abed tipa basically means this hole in the ground that gets all the water, does not lose any drop of it, meaning all the Torah that he's ever learned is in him. He did not lose, he did not forget, he did not ignore anything that he learned. He took whatever he got from his former rabbis, whatever he got from tradition, and he kept it forever. And that is also what he's going to eventually bring to his students. That's the praise that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is giving to his first student. But what is Kamayan HaMitgaber, the second student? That is a totally different type of aspect or approach to studying Torah. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach Kamayan HaMitgaber means he from inside. That's what he's going to teach on. It's two different approaches of how do we learn Torah, what are we supposed to do with our Torah. And these two rabbis basically represent this type of approach about learning Torah in other midrashim, in other places in the Mishnah, where one of them represents more the Bet Shammai approach, which is Rabbi Elazar ben Horkinus, which believe that we are not supposed to invent anything. We're supposed to bring the Torah that we got from Moshe Rabbeinu down through the generations, and the same Torah, the same thing that we got from our fathers, exactly the same, without losing anything, we should bring on. On the other side, the Bet Hillel approach, which is represented here, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, is more of development, is more of we can create something new. Every generation has the right to find something new in Torah. And he is the Ma'ayan HaMitgaber, meaning from himself, he creates his Torah, and that's what he's going to teach, and that's what he wants his pupils to do the same, to recreate Torah every generation. If people know the very, very known machloket about Tanuro shel Achnai, the whole discussion about how do we approach a halachic problem? Can we bring it from Shamayim, or can we bring evidence from by miracles, or should we bring evidence from Chachamim? I'm not going to go into this Mishnah because it's not our topic, but it's the same two people that are arguing about, are we supposed to take all the approaches that we got formerly from our Chachamim and continue with that and not change anything? Or can we find the Chidush and lechadesh bechol dor vador? I'm going to continue. Just another aspect of usage of, or symbolism of, bo and be'er in our sources. In Sefer Yirmiyahu, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to describe the sins of Bnei Israel and tell them off that they're following Avodah Zarah and not following HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he basically tells Yirmiyahu, and Yirmiyahu says, Ki shtayim ra'ot asa'ami azvu mekor mayim chayim. They left the permanent stream of water that comes from the underground, the Ma'ayan HaMitgaber. They left me, God, who's there always for them, who's described as symbolized in the pasuk as mekor mayim chayim. What for? They left me for Avodah Zarah, which is described as borot nishbarim asher lo yachilu hamayim. Broken holes in the ground. Holes in the ground that cannot hold the water. Holes in the ground that the water that comes into them dissolves into the ground because of the cracks in it. That's the description of Avodah Zarah that you cannot rely on. I'm going to skip just another Shir Shirim Rabbah. I'm not going to go through it, just to show you that mayim, as we all know, are a symbolism to Torah. Not only the sources of water as how to learn Torah, but the water itself as a symbolism of Torah. Just one of the phrases, Ma hamayim chayim le'olam. Water is something that always is there, never changes, never ends, will always have water in the world. Kach Torah chayim le'olam. Or Ma hamayim yordim tipin tipin. Water comes down drop by drop by drop by drop and become big rivers. Kach Torah. Adam lamed shtei halachot hayom. One today, another one tomorrow, the third one the next day, one by one, and become a whole nachal novea. Again, nachal novea, something that also he himself recreates all the time. So again, not only how to learn Torah, but the Torah itself is symbolized by water. Good. And that again reminds us, and again I'm shortening this, but just to show you the story about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, how did Rabbi Akiva begin his life? So there are many stories in the Midrash. The very known one about Rabbi Akiva, the shepherd, when he was 40 years old, never learned anything, decided one day when he saw water dripping on a stone, and that symbolism of water dripping on the stone is like what we said before. Something that is always there, but something which is maybe soft, but can carve a stone with its dedication, with its over and over and over again, is what Rabbi Akiva learns from what he sees there every day. The same way that the water drops patiently, drip by drip by drip, so can I learn Torah even though my heart is like stone, even though that I've never learned before. Again, the symbolism of water. And the last thing I would like to end with is that water symbolizes not only our connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the sources of water represent the way we study Torah, the water itself represents Torah, but the water also represents the Geulah. And as we say, when we sing Shir HaMa'alot, we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring us Geulah as Shuva Hashem et Shvitenu Ka'afikim B'Negev. What is Afikim B'Negev? Afikim B'Negev are basically the streams, the floods that suddenly come in the Negev, the dry place. When we say we want HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring the Geulah as a flood, what are we actually asking? So whoever has a chance to see a flood in the Negev knows that that's one of the most, I think, exciting things that you can ever see. In the very, very dry land, suddenly, from far away, you hear a noise. And that noise comes stronger and becomes stronger and stronger. And that is basically the noise of water coming down from the mountains of Yerushalayim and the mountains of Hebron, where rain dropped up there. The Negev itself did not get any water, but the water is coming to the Negev from up there in the mountains, streaming down to the Negev, and it's considered to be beautiful, but also very dangerous. Why is it very dangerous? Because it's so sudden. People can cannot know when the flood will come. If you hear that rain came down in Yerushalayim, you should know that in a half an hour, a stream can come down to the Negev. It's something very, very sudden. And that's why it's also dangerous, because people go and take a walk in those streams and suddenly a burst of water comes towards them. So why is that a symbolism to the Geulah? We're asking Kadosh Baruch Hu to bring the Geulah fast, now, suddenly, not to wait and prepare us. We are ready now. Bring it now, like a flood in the Negev. That's what we want. And that flood, and if you'll open up the internet and click to see the beauty of the Negev today, a few days after it rained so much in Eretz Yisrael these past few weeks, you'll see that a flood in the Negev basically gives life to the Negev. Everything's blooming, everything is green because of those floods. So I bless us all to see Afikim B'Negev, the Geulah, as soon as possible. Good evening.